I'm Tim, welcome to Watch You Want, and thanks for logging on. Today we're looking at an early Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore reference 25770ST, 42mm in stainless steel. You can buy this Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Colors Edition on our website, watchyouwant.com, and if you enjoy these videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Watch You Want Inc. Indeed, this is an early example of the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak. Not the earliest, but launched 4 years after the very first. The Color Edition came out of Baselworld 1997 as a tribute to the 25th anniversary of the original Gerald Genta Royal Oak. As the watch came into its own and began to establish an identity, this watch would be remembered as the first of the special edition Royal Oaks, not an individually numbered limited series, but the first of the specially themed Royal Oaks. Soon thereafter, the very first of the official numbered series, the End of Days, was launched and a revolution began. But you can see that on my wrist, 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, I want to focus on how the 51mm lug-to-lug measurement of the original oversized sports watch sits on a smaller wrist. Now, it's a fact, AP pretty much added the term oversized sports watch to the lexicon with the Royal Oak Offshore. 15mm thick, it definitely sits high above the wrist, so you're not going to clear a dress cuff. Frankly, with a dial this citrus, you're going to have trouble wearing this one with very formal attire unless you're an absolute master of irony. But it will clear a sport jacket or a blazer sleeve, so you do have some level of versatility built in here, especially since the bezel is rounded and has a little bit of inward curvature. But 51mm lug-to-lug means it will take up every millimeter of geography on your wrist. One advantage that this one has, though, if you do have a smaller wrist, and this is subtle, but it's the first generation Audemars Piguet Offshore strap lug interface. When the watch first launched, there were two types of strap junctions. Watches that came on straps, and back then they were always calfskin, more on that in a moment. Watches that came with the straps had this single point of attachment, and those that came on bracelets had the twin plot attachment that we came to know later as the all-purpose strap or bracelet interface. Well, the thing about this hinge is that it's not compatible with the Royal Oak Offshore bracelets, but what it brings to the table as a sort of trade-off is flexibility. And you can see, unlike later offshores with the plots, I'm able to draw the hornback straight down. This is a much later replacement strap, an AP hornback on an early single hinge offshore case. But you can see, even though the hornback has a reputation as a rigid monster that likes to flare outward and make the watch incompatible with smaller wrists, on the older version, that problem is actually eliminated. So if you want to wear a hornback strap on an offshore, but your wrist is smaller like mine, 15, 16 centimeters, the early example is the solution. Now, I'll say that the watch wears with a good deal of heft. Although it is on a strap, we're still talking about a huge piece of metal. So that sense that you're wearing a quality product, you don't need precious metal to get it when you're talking offshores. These even have a little bit of heft with titanium. So in steel, believe me, you won't be left wanting if you like the premium pull of a high-end watch. And this one features the later AP signature style deployment featuring the inset AP initials, so you're getting a little bit of an upgrade here in that it has the later style strap with contrasting yellow stitch to match the dial, as well as the AP inset initial buckle. This is an outstanding combination of ergonomics and classical content. Now, the 25th anniversary offshore color editions were launched, again, to celebrate the anniversary of the original Royal Oak. It took a while for the offshore to gain traction and become a cultural institution in its own right. In fact, the very earliest watches didn't even say offshore on the back. They didn't even say AP on the case back. Well, by 1997 that had changed, and the color edition, launched in a series of 8 different colors, helped the offshore to come into its own as a watch with a distinct personality and a different buyer demographic than the traditional smaller, thinner, more discreet, some might say more demure Audemars Piguet dress references. The offshore started a trend that continues to this day, and while it's become a bit of a elder statesman of high horology in its own right, it hasn't lost any of the attitude or stance. In fact, this watch today, even though it features the original dial design and the original strap interface, still reads as an offshore. It's unmistakable in profile and in presence. But I do want to highlight what sets that early dial apart. You can see the contrast of the sub-registers. You can see what are known as the blob indices on the petite tapisserie dial. This is very much the tapisserie cut, the pantograph cut hobnail design that you see on the original Royal Oak. It doesn't have the mega tapisserie block cut that almost looks like a city grid on the current offshores, and it doesn't have the current offshore's proclivity for using Arabic numerals. This is a very different generation of offshore design, and I like the fact that it looks like something from a different era, but at the same time, from an arm's length, there's no mistaking the provenance and the pedigree. The offshore all the way, but from a different time. Because so few of these color editions were made, you rarely see them. Now, the most popular examples are the blue, the orange, the yellow, and they're generally the best examples to own because they are the most iconic of those 25th anniversary pieces. And that's why this one, with the inset contrasting blue metallic subregisters and the yellow dial, is such a, I would say, quintessential entry in the collection of any offshore collector. If you want one to represent every era since the 1993 debut, you have to have one of the colors, and the best ones to own, in my opinion, for sheer character, are the citrus colors. The green, the yellow, the orange. They really stand out. They really have they really make a statement. They make an entrance. They have a visual punch that's somewhat lacking in the more muted dials like the brown or the violet or the blue. And inside you get JLC. I should mention that 1997 was a completely different world because not only was AP still exhibiting at Baselworld instead of SIHH in Geneva, but at the time, AP actually owned 40% of Jaeger-LeCoultre. So the use of JLC movements in AP was very much keeping it in the family. Now what we have here is the caliber 2226 with the 2840 chronograph module. It's based on the JLC 889 base movement. 54 joules in total, 370 parts. You can't see it beneath the case back because inside is a soft iron anti-magnetic cage. That's exclusive to the JLC powered offshores. It doesn't continue with the in-house movements, but that beautifully finished AP movement, a fine high horology piece in its own right, really was the tail end of an era. The junction between AP and JLC ended in a formal sense in 2000 when Richemont bought the share of JLC that VDO owned and bought the share of JLC that AP owned, with the proviso that AP would have the first right of refusal if Richemont ever decides to sell JLC. I don't see that happening. But the bottom line is, this was one hell of a send-off for that era. And of course, the JLC movement inside ensures that the quality of the actual mechanism, the watchmaking, is up to the standard of the finishing on the bezel, on the hand chamfers of the case, on the brushed hoods of the bezel, and the polished inset stainless steel hexagonal Royal Oak bezel bolts. It's a wonderful junction of JLC movement, Audemars Piguet finishing on the case, the bezel, all the visible components. But I want to mention the one visible component that is not AP here, strap notwithstanding, is the dial. Because while we have AP content and we have JLC content inside, we also have a little bit of a link to Patek Philippe, because Stern Creations created all of the AP Royal Oak and Royal Oak Offshore dials right up until 2012 when they were all taken in-house, created on a pantograph, a device that basically dates back to the 19th century. Stern Creations, from the very first Royal Oak in 1972 to the 40th anniversary in 2012, created all of the dials using the vintage techniques, so you have a little bit of Patek Philippe DNA. Let's not forget that in 1932 the Sterns, who were dial manufacturers, purchased Patek Philippe, and that's where that sort of crossing of fates makes sense. The Sterns were originally dial manufacturers. As late as the 1950s, they were still making dials for Rolex. So the AP with the Stern dial, the JLC movement, and of course AP's own revolutionary first-generation offshore design is a true collector's piece, and it's one for the traditionalists and the romantics among you. Now, romanticism and the offshore might seem incompatible at face value, but when you have a watch with this much character, it's more about tugging at the heartstrings than appealing to the mind. But you can have both, and you can see and purchase this Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore reference 25770ST 25th Anniversary Color Edition in yellow on our website, watchyouwant.com.